Hey guys, thanks for joining. What I want to do today, I want to talk about something that is really, really close to my heart at the moment, which is hosting podcasts. Furthermore, I want to explore how we can become a great podcaster, someone who either hosts, people for a dialogue or running solo podcasts like I'm doing right now. How it helps, what qualities and set of qualities and skills really helps in podcasting and then translate to our real life. To begin with, I want to say that podcast is the format that I was pretty skeptical about 4 years ago. Before one businessman, and he's actually someone who has created a runners club, Mikhail Levchenko, that actually brought it on the map. And I saw that someone from Kiyv, from my city, is doing this podcast thing, and I realized that it's pretty cool, which is interesting because podcast is an old news in America, and since I'm that engaged with American culture, one can think that I actually saw my first podcast, on YouTube from Americans. But yes, I did see them. But where I really realized that it's a great way to share knowledge and exchange viewpoints is from Just Punk It, Mikhail Levchenko. Kudos to you, my man. Before I get into what makes a great podcaster and how what makes a great podcaster also helps in life, I want to say that there is really, really fascinating stats that I recently uncovered. And which makes sense by all means. But it was said that, first of all, we live in the overabundance and oversaturation of blogs. There are 7.5 billion people right now in the world, and for blogs there are almost like a billion of them. So the competition is really, really stiff. It's through the roof. We got almost one podcast for every 7 people, which is too much. And now, since we're living in this economy of, attention economy, what draws more attention than the video format? In America, people listen to podcasts more than they watch. But at the same time, I see how video podcasts really get their share of the market and the tempo with which it develops. And now, I don't want to lose the track of my thoughts. I was going to say that since we have so many blogs, I think that people should start their own podcasts, and this will be a blog. So it can be a content marketing plan, right? But instead of text, that you can always give away to someone, with video podcasts, you as a business owner, as an influencer, as a blogger, as a content creator, you won't be able to substitute yourself. You won't be able to sort of cheat. You can only do it by yourself, which is such a cool thing. Okay, but let's take one step at a time. I wanted to say that we have like 40 million podcasts or something, as compared to blogs. We have 1 billion of them. So there's no competition of this level in podcasting. Next thing, 70% of podcast listeners have higher education, which is big news, because if we understand that people who watch or listen podcasts want to think, right? That's a great audience to making business, especially if you're selling something that ignites brain activity, right? Especially if you're doing something that requires people to think. If you're a psychologist, if you're a lawyer, if you are an SMM manager, if you're just a business person, it's great to, cross paths with people who are actually educated. And what flows from this stat is another stat, that the income, the average income is $75,000 per year. So in America, the average income for people who listen podcasts, and I think that it also can expand to other countries, people have money. So it's a market that you want to target. This is what the general picture looks like as far as starting a podcast goes. I believe that there should be a certain point in a person's development to want to start a podcast. How it started for me, minding the fact that in the beginning, I was skeptical. 5 or 6 years ago, I was pretty skeptical about it. And now I'm turning to this person who's advocating and promoting this thing. So how this transition took place for me. I had great role models, and I picked interest in different types of content. And at a certain point, I realized that the majority of clips that I see on YouTube are just cuts from conversations. This is what's so super cool about it. What I offer as part of our services with our agency is that you record like an hour and a half conversation, and then you use this conversation, which is always dynamic, which always got something to it. Sometimes it's difficult, especially for people who are not super extroverted or energized, who are more introverted and, kind of staying on the low end in terms of energy. It's difficult to bring this type of content, create this type of content, energetic type of content by themselves. Therefore, talking to people is a great way to have the spark, to create the spark, to create this real interest inside of the conversation. And then skilled editors can take cuts from the conversation to use it for your social media, which is a pretty cool trick, in my opinion. And so for me, I found the clips, and I realized that they are all parts of conversations. And I'm 33 years old. I'm turning 34 in April. And for me, I realized that I want to know more. I want to hear more. That's why I'm religiously stating that podcast and long format is the format for people who want to think, who want to see how the ideas develop. This for me is a great exercise for, my cognitive development. I can hear and listen and see how people develop their thoughts, which is impossible to see in a short format because we actually cut right to the chase in the short format. But in a long format, we can actually see how, especially when there's no editing, right? I like raw podcasts. Like, for example, Joe Rogan, they don't cut out things, like they always leave all the bloopers and blah. It's okay to leave it on a podcast. Some of my clients want us to cut them all out, but I always argue that they make it real authentic. All this they actually show that you are a human who make mistakes, and people who make mistakes are actually really attractive because they showcase that they're not perfect, right? And especially with social media, with this beautification in social media and Instagram, seeing that people are imperfect is a really great thing to do. Maybe not to play too much with it, but at least on podcasts, living these things just manifests that you are a real human being. Yeah, and I was then starting to listen more and more of these podcasts, and then I realized at some point that for some reason I realized that I actually like hosts. I like hosts more than I like guests. Of course, powerful, influencing guest is always like this clickbait. It's something that makes you want to go check out the particular episode. But at the same time, I realized that I have great things to say about the host, and at some point I realized that I want to also check out what type of questions does the host ask, how does he conduct himself. Yeah, for the most part, I'm listening to podcasts with male hosts. I don't know, it's just I watched a few with Mel Robbins. She's a great host, but she's there is such thing that where some hosts, to be a great host, you gotta be intelligent, right? And what this is partly answering our main subject of this live stream. When you're intelligent, you get more and more knowledge and feel for other people. It helps you in life, in interpersonal communication. But you see, some podcasters are really great listeners. Joe Rogan is a glaring example of this. Has got no problem showing that he doesn't know something, which touches on our previous point, that he's showing that he is a real human being, and showing vulnerability and acknowledging that you don't know stuff actually attracts people. It doesn't attract someone who's really uncomfortable being around vulnerability, because in my business years, I've been around people who are super uncomfortable. That made them unconfident when I asked stupid questions. But for podcasts, if you can ask stupid questions, and if you have enough self-esteem to even kind of look like a fool for a second, it's totally fine. And I think it's actually a great maneuver for hosting a podcast. Yeah, so Joe Rogan always as Jordan Peterson said, he's consulting his ignorance. And sometimes his stupidity or whatever. He doesn't know something, it's okay. He accepts it, he admits it, he asks the questions, and as a result, everyone benefits. He benefit, the audience benefit, everyone benefit. Yeah, so as I told you, I liked podcast hosts for ability to show vulnerability. I think that helps in life. I think that we're fed up, just straight up fed up with people who want to know all the answers. I mean, who sort of make this illusion that they all know all the answers. People who don't know the answers, who can ask for an apology, who can show that they don't know something. These are the people that I believe are going to be increasingly in demand in this year. Okay, moving along. Let's talk about solo podcasts for a second. So what makes a great host for solo podcasts? By the way, with podcast, it can be either audio version or video version, and by the same token, it can be solo, as I'm doing right now, or it can be a dialogue, a conversation with one person, with two people, with three people. There is like this podcast, PPD podcasts, if you want to check it out. Folks who are Republicans in America, they have 6 hosts. It makes a great conversation, actually. So for the solo host, you got to be comfortable and adept in thinking out loud. one person asked me about how I prepare for my speeches, and I said that I always put up the thesis, right? It's just statements, short key moments that I want to lay out during my speech. So I never prepare to an extent that then would put me in a position where I have to follow the particular order or something. I just put out main things that I want to mention. Correct? I think the improvisation part is super important. So if you can improvise, and if you're okay thinking out loud, it's a quality of extroverts for the most part. And I realized that I'm an extrovert not that long ago, but main definition or main go-to move of an extrovert is actually express all their thoughts or think out loud. So if I had a cat, I would talk to a cat. So when I'm alone, I'm singing a lot. So I know that what I say to the universe, when I pronounce it, not inside of my head, but out loud, it actually sort of resonates with. I can hear myself. That's what I'm trying to say. I can hear myself, and then I can sort of record it on my intellectual or emotional Winchester. You see what I'm saying? So for extrovert, you you feel the world through a verbal expression. So that's a really big thing for me. I want to speak. That's why I make a great solo podcaster. Maybe I would be even a better solo podcaster than a dialect podcaster. But I'm having these dialects, and I'm super enriched and empowered and excited about every single day, every single time I've recorded a podcast with someone. So let's talk about the dialect. What makes a great host in a dialect? First of all, just let's backpedal a bit. Let's backpedal a bit. I believe the best podcasts are not interviews. I believe that you gotta have enough intelligence and self-worth and self-esteem to feel like you are on the same level with your guest. This is something that I constantly repeat and recommend to folks who are doing sales. Don't ever underestimate yourself, and don't even call yourself to be a sales manager. Position yourself as someone who is really in charge of business dealings of your company. So when you're calling someone, don't underprice yourself. Say that, hey, I'm not a sales manager. I'm a business representative responsible for South America or whatever, like European development in our country, and I want to communicate think that you know so much about them, and it actually establishes a rapport much quicker. But at the same time, you wanna improvise, you wanna give some of your viewpoints and not plainly ask questions, because asking plain questions is journalism. Podcast to me is not journalism. Podcast is just a cozy conversation between two people, uncut, with all the bloopers left, and all the stuff that sometimes people want to cut out. Anyway, that's my viewpoint on podcasts. Now, knowing the context is just another. I'm looking at my tips there. So yeah, I don't write tips on the laptop, by the way. I write tips on the whiteboard that I have. Yeah, teacher mode, teacher Chris. So yeah, knowing the context, knowing where the person is coming from, makes up for a good dialogue. At the same time, you have to remember that what you're creating is content. And every content, and I'm learning the ropes of storytelling and Hollywood filmmaking from courses on masterclass. And LeVar Burton is giving a class on storytelling. He says that stories is what create connection between people, right? And you always got to be really specific in your stories in order for people to backbone to my podcast is being able to understand how they found their passion. Because I invite only people who I feel resonance and who I think share my values. This is very important for you when you are starting the podcast and thinking through your concept or strategy. You got to understand who you want to invite, what topic you want to cover for sure. But at the same time, you got to be people who you, I think, love, like in terms of the philosophy that they exhibit, that they exercise in their life. For me, it's like people who are honest, who are straightforward, not afraid to change something, not afraid to start fresh, not afraid to be independent or not work in corporate world. From what you can see, I have a tiny bit of people who work on my podcast who work in a corporate world. I realize that I'm much more interested in independent people, consultants, whoever, artists, trainers, because it's really coincides. Their values really coincides with my values, and entrepreneurs for sure. But there is a turning point in the life of entrepreneur where he is pulled by the corporate world, especially when you start working with investors. That's what happened in my case. When I started working with investors from a huge corporation, IT corporation in Ukraine, they really blocked our entrepreneurial mindset and what they were trying to, and they succeeded in that. They turned us from entrepreneurs into being managers, C-level executives, hiring managers, administrators. So I don't like being an administrative side of business. I actually like creating stuff. I actually want to create solutions, invent solutions. And so this early phase of business was